I'm Bill Haslam, Governor of the great state of Tennessee. Welcome to Travellers Rest Plantation and its new museum. Nashville has a rich history that dates back more than 1,000 years. It includes settlements of Native American tribes through frontier times. John Overton built Travellers Rest in 1799, and it later became an important site during the Civil War, especially during the Battle of Nashville. The following documentary, Voices of War, chronicles the full range of human emotions and experiences of the Overton family and others on these grounds. Join me as we journey back to Travellers Rest Plantation during the Civil War.
The opening guns of the Battle of Nashville were fired.
Our country is in an awful state of commotion and excitement.
Tennessee will not furnish a single man for
Wooden
purposes
legs and
of
arms
coercion.
were first provided.
Those are the campfires of
It
the
is the
Yankees.
lion and the lamb lying down.
I am an American citizen.
Built in 1799 by Judge John Overton of Nashville, Travellers Rest already had a long and illustrious history when the war started. In its early days, it was visited by prominent figures such as Andrew Jackson and Sam Houston, as Overton helped them shape the development of the state of Tennessee. By 1861, the house belonged to Colonel John Overton, the judge's son, and his wife Harriet. When the war began, Travellers Rest was a farm of around 1,000 acres, with tobacco as the cash crop. The household and the fields were worked by more than 60 enslaved African American men and women who lived on the plantation. Thomas Claiborne, brother-in-law of Colonel Overton, wrote,
Our country is in an awful state of commotion and excitement. Unless the North backs down and agrees to our rights, we are all out. If the government attempts to force any southern state into submission without proper guarantees, there will be war to a certainty between the two sections, between the North and the South.
On April 12, 1861, the situation escalated. With the firing on Fort Sumter, President Lincoln sent out a call for volunteers to put down the rebellion. Governor Isham Harris of Tennessee responded.
Tennessee will not furnish a single man for purposes of coercion, but 50,000 if necessary for the defense of our rights and those of our Southern brothers.
The governor asked for a second vote on the issue to be held on June 8th. This time, the vote was 2/3 in favor of secession. Tennessee became the last state to leave the nation during the Civil War.
The people of Tennessee have declared their independence of the federal government by a most overwhelming majority.
For families, painful choices were at hand. John Overton's brother-in-law, Thomas Claiborne, resigned from the U.S. Army. His wife Annie and his daughters Mollie and Hattie lived at Travellers Rest for the remainder of the war. Mollie Claiborne in later life remembered,
Colonel Overton was opposed to secession. When Tennessee seceded, Colonel Overton bowed to the will of the people and threw his fortune and his energy into the Southern cause.
War came to Tennessee in 1862. Following the defeat of Fort Donelson, the city was left undefended. Panic seized the city as Union troops approached. The Overtons, like many others, faced an uncertain future at the hands of an invading army.
The sudden flight of the governor and the General Assembly is throwing the whole city into a panic. Such hurrying to and fro has never been seen. Before nightfall, hundreds of families made their way south, having no idea why they were abandoning comfortable homes or where they were going.
Nashville was taken without a shot fired, the first Southern capital to be captured during the war. From this point forward, the citizens of the city faced an uneasy peace under the watchful eye of the Federal Army. The occupation of Nashville also meant outlying farms were often the target of foraging parties, raids, or vandalism. Mollie Claiborne remembered.
The rush of troop-laden trains, one following the other in quick succession through the peaceful grounds of Travellers Rest, caused many a heart pang to its inhabitants, and the dread of what must surely follow lay like a pall upon all alike.
Colonel Overton, a Confederate sympathizer, left Travellers Rest under the threat of federal arrest. The plantation was then run by his wife Harriet and her two sisters. Soon after General Negley assumed command, information was received that a large amount of horseshoe iron and nails was concealed at the Overton farm.
Madam, I wish to see some person who is in charge of this place. I am ordered to search for contraband of war.
You can search if you wish, but you will not find any contraband. I wish, however, you would keep the soldiers away from the house.
I will commence by searching under the floor of the meat house.
There is no use of having any words about it. You will find some horseshoes there.
And they were found. About 2 tons of valuable iron was turned over to the government. Many times during the occupation, Harriet Overton with her sisters, Annie Claiborne and Mary Maxwell, found it necessary to negotiate with the Union High Command. Some officers proved more sympathetic than others.
While General Negley was stationed around the place, Miss Maxwell wrote a polite note to him asking for a guard for the protection of the family. He refused and made the gracious remark that he would like to hang her as high as Haman.
Annie Claiborne's experience on the frontier before the war came in handy. She had many old friends serving in the Union forces who acted as beneficiaries.
On one occasion, my mother went to General Granger's headquarters with a list of all sorts of supplies for Travellers Rest. She said to him, "General Granger, there are 80 Negroes and often 30 white people at Travellers Rest. There's not a dust of flour or grain of sugar or coffee in the storeroom. I wish you would approve this list." He had often been her guest on the Texas frontier before the war.
During the first half of the war, those who lived under the yoke of slavery found themselves in a strange world as Union authorities argued among themselves what course to pursue with those seeking freedom. Many slaves ran away to join the Yankees.
Mrs. Overton, with only her Negro driver, was driven 18 miles into Williamson County to Mr. Sam Perkins' home for food and supplies. The next trip they made into Nashville, the young Negro left his seat and went to the Yankees.
As the war continued, policies shifted, and African Americans found new opportunities to bring the struggle for freedom into their own hands. In the fall of 1863, the U.S. Army began enlisting freed slaves into regiments of the USCT, the United States Colored Troops.
Grapevine intelligence reached Travellers Rest that Hood's army was coming into Tennessee. The knowledge filled every heart with great joy.
In the autumn of 1864, a Confederate army under General John Bell Hood launched an invasion of Tennessee with the objective of capturing Nashville. After the devastating defeat at Franklin on November 30th, his forces approached Nashville. Colonel Overton rode with them. The Overtons with their friends and family turned out enthusiastically to greet them.
My mother noted 3 horsemen entering the avenue gate. A few seconds of time and they were at the door, responding to the question, "Are you Federals or Confederates?" They tossed their caps with a shout, "We are forcemen, madam."
From the 2nd through the 15th of December, 1864, Travellers Rest served as the headquarters for General Hood's army. Many soldiers of all ranks were encamped here during that time. Confederate chaplain Reverend Charles T. Quintard recorded in his diary,
Litany and Holy Communion at Army Headquarters at 11:30 a.m. Prayers at 8 p.m. Tonight, General Forrest shares my bed. A century says, it is the lion and the lamb lying down together. He is certainly an uncut diamond of remarkably fine personal appearance and great native vigor of expression.
Confederate Private John Johnson of the 14th Tennessee Cavalry recorded,
We rode up into the premises of Colonel John Overton, at that time regarded as the wealthiest man in Tennessee. We stopped at the end of his back porch. The old man came out, where he sat and talked with us for a little while in a very kindly tone. Pointing to some fires that were blazing on the hill towards Nashville, he said, "Those are the campfires of the Yankees."
Hood's staff was relatively comfortable in their new quarters, but for the rank and file of the Confederate Army, the weather was bleak, supplies poor, and conditions were miserable.
Friday night, 5 rebel soldiers came in on one part of the Federal line and gave themselves up. They stated that their sufferings from cold and hunger were too great, so they concluded to change their mode of life.
Memory holds one picture. A lone soldier over a smoldering campfire sticking an ear of corn into the fire.
In each brigade, a detail was set at work making shoes for the barefooted men. Just a few days before the Battle of Nashville began, Travellers Rest was the scene of a strangely romantic interlude for one of Hood's young staff officers.
It was here that Miss Mary Hadley reunited with Major William Clare, and he prevailed upon her to marry him.
Today at the Methodist Meeting House at Brentwood, I united in the holy bonds of matrimony Major William Clare and Miss Mary Hadley of Nashville. After the ceremony, the party retired to the residence of John Overton, where a grand dinner was given.
The young girls made the parlors cheery with their music and song. And for the time, some soldiers forgot it was winter and war.
The couple spent their brief honeymoon in an army tent. Just 2 days later, their wedded bliss was rudely interrupted.
On December the 15th, the opening guns of the Battle of Nashville were fired. An orderly brought General Hood's horse to the L of the great porch. When mounting his horse, an observer exclaimed, "A piece of a man, one leg and one arm."
During the first day's battle, the fighting took place several miles to the west of the farm. The family listened apprehensively to the sound of the guns. By daylight of the second day, the armies had moved onto the Overton farm.
On the morning of the 16th, they were at it in good earnest by 7 o'clock.
A member of the 35th Alabama reported,
Our regiment had to endure the havoc and crash of these missiles of death. Cannonballs flew thick and fast, bursting all around, tearing up the ground and cutting trees to pieces.
During the day, those sheltering at Travellers Rest took cover from the heavy Union fire.
The front cellar was filled with white and black, for the shells filled the air and fell in every direction. This cellar was filled with the children and their nurses, the bride, Mrs. William Clare, and a Negro brought up from a Mississippi plantation owned by Mr. Overton. They watched the bomb shells that were flying through the air and lighting in various parts of the grounds and garden. A bombshell struck the wall of the little dining room, making a large hole. Into this room, 14 servants had congregated, and they just left in time. Otherwise, there would have been great loss of life.
During the afternoon of December 16th, 1864, the Union Army launched an attack against Confederates, dug in on a portion of the plantation known as Peach Orchard Hill. The fighting was bloody and notable for the large number of African American soldiers who distinguished themselves.
On this hill, after the great battle, the dead Negroes lay so thick that eyewitnesses declared they could walk over the battlefield upon their dead bodies.
I'm glad I saw that fight. I'm a living witness of the black man's valor. 300 of the poor fellows kissed the earth during the charge, while 18 of their officers were killed and wounded.
Sergeant Major Daniel Atwood, 10th U.S. Colored Troops, wrote,
It was the first time in the history of the Army of the Cumberland that the blood of black and white men flowed freely together for one common cause of freedom and independence. As a result, wherever the flag of our love goes, our hopes may advance, and we may, as a people, with propriety, exclaim to the world, I am an American citizen. I ask, is there not something in this over which to rejoice and be proud?
By nightfall, the Union Army had broken through Hood's lines and the Confederates were in full retreat. The women and children at Travellers Rest found themselves surrounded by a threatening mob of Union stragglers. In the midst of this chaos, an old friend from the Texas frontier arrived.
Some hours after dark, a federal general, Washington Elliott, arrived at Travellers Rest and asked if Mrs. Claiborne lived there. My mother stepped forward, saying, Yes, General Elliott, I am here, and gladder to see you than any but a Confederate soldier. My mother conducted him across the hall, and opening a door said, General Elliott, this was General Hood's room, and I'm conferring a great favor on you in placing you here. This visit was highly appreciated and gave great comfort. The spring of 1865 arrived. News came of General Lee's surrender and President Abraham Lincoln's death.
Over 500,000 people were dead and many more maimed. For many, the war took a toll on their bodies and souls that lasted for the remainder of their lives.
The women's work was not over. It had just begun. Wooden legs and arms were first provided. The dead were gathered together out of the trenches where they had been half buried. The old soldiers were provided a home through the legislature.
Colonel Overton returned home to Travellers Rest in February of 1865 and found much of his property confiscated in his absence. He was threatened with arrest as an ex-Confederate. His battle with the government was just beginning.
Feeling it to be my duty as well as a privilege to take the amnesty oath at first point when I could, I did so. I respectfully asked to be restored to my rights, which have been denied me.
The case of John Overton has been finally decided by President Andrew Johnson, and the pardon, which had been withdrawn, is reissued from the executive office.
In a letter to General George H. Thomas, in command of the military division of the Tennessee headquarters at Nashville, President Johnson wrote,
The amnesty oath taken by Mr. John Overton has been pleaded in court, and all suits brought against his property have been dismissed. A pardon has also been issued in his case. I do not see how his property can be longer held by the United States.
As peace came to the land, Nashville began to put the war behind it, and John Overton began to rebuild his damaged businesses. Due to its occupation early in the war by federal troops, Nashville did not see the intense and destructive fighting that had occurred in cities such as Richmond or Charleston. This relative lack of destruction enabled Nashville to recover more quickly from the war.
In 1884, the New England Press Association visited Nashville. They were taken to Travellers Rest, the home of John Overton. That venerable gentleman advanced to the edge of the porch and delivered a short speech of welcome. He pointed to the stately old house and said, Every nail in that old hulk was made in a blacksmith shop on this place. It might burn, but like this great Union, it could never be rent asunder.
Let us pause in life's pleasures and count and sorrow with the poor. There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis a song and sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. While we seek mirth and beauty and music light and gay, there are frail forms fainting at the door. Though their voices are silent, their pleading looks will say, oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis a song and sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. There's a pale, sorrowed maiden who toils her life away with a worn heart whose better days are o'er. Though her voice would be merry, 'tis sighing all the day. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis a